nature has capabilities of which we could be ignorant. And that's the second part of Augustine's argument, because he was having an argument with a Manichaean, Faustus,
yes,
who said, you're contradicting yourself, and God contradicts himself if he performs these supernatural acts which contradict nature. And Augustine's reply was, no, what God does not contradict nature. It's simply beyond our knowledge of how nature actually works.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to 21st Century Renaissance. My name is Dr. Michael Lopiano, and I am joined today by my guest, Dr. Carlos M.N. Eire. Carlos Eire is T. Lawrason Riggs Professor of History and Religious Studies at Yale University. I've had the pleasure of studying under Carlos during my PhD at Yale for some 7 years. It is wonderful to have him on the show. He's going to be talking to us. We're going to talk a bit today about his most recent book, They Flew, A History of the Impossible. We'll think a little bit about what the notion of the impossible has to do with the historic Renaissance, with our questions of the 21st century Renaissance. And he's also going to tell us a bit about his recent project over the past 18 months, the Christian Mysticism Podcast. So, yes. Carlos, wonderful to see you. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for the invitation. This is wonderful.
Yes.
It's great to see you.
Likewise. Yes.
I still remember being just completely stupefied in 1963 at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. There was a picture phone. A very early Bell model. It's a picture phone. And you could actually get in this booth and see someone and speak with them in some other museum. I can't remember where it was. So just random people. But, now we have this, talk about sea change in communication. This is it.
Yeah. Well, I remember something. I have a memory actually very similar to that. My parents, when I was young, we used to, for some reason, I never could figure this out, but for some reason, flights from Connecticut, where actually I grew up, flights from Connecticut to Florida were very inexpensive. Like you could get tickets for you get round trip tickets for $40 or $50 when I was a kid. Rather inexplicably, I don't know why it was so inexpensive. It's some, 1,500 miles to fly or something. So we used to go to, my parents would take me to Disney World with some frequency. And at Disney World, at Epcot Center in Disney World,
there you go.
There was this pavilion called Innoventions, so a portmanteau of innovation and invention. Innoventions, and I can remember being, maybe 6 or 7 years old, and they had these sort of like model rooms, and you'd walk into one of these rooms, and they'd give you a demo about what life was going to look like, 20, 30 years in the future, something like that. And sure enough, you walked in, and there was a recreation of what exactly we're doing right now. It looks like. What we're doing exactly right now with the two side by side. We're like, oh my gosh, wow. People are going to talk on the phone, but it's going to be video all the time. Yeah. That's wild. You can just look at people however many miles away. And I think the scene was something like Son and Grandma, but yeah.
Well, it's our equivalent of people seeing, printed texts for the first time. Oh,
yes.
Look, all these books are identical. And they're kind of almost mistake-free, error-free. How about that?
Yeah, well, that's sort of one of the main ideas that we've been thinking about and sort of coming back to on 21st century Renaissance. That this sort of the ability to, well, what would you call it, right? To democratize access to information and communication, or something like that.
Yeah, and in our day and age, it's democratizing, not just in terms of the audience, but in terms of the presenters or authors or whoever is, like you are, conducting this salon. Let's call it a salon.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's something. Yeah, to have access to that sort of form of communication. Number one, to have access to it, but to number two, to be able to access it at such economic rates. Right. So something I think that's understated about, perhaps not among historians, but perhaps among a more general audience, or general public, I should say, is the difference in expense to just sort of run off, 500 cheap copies of a loose leaf book, no matter how profound, right, the contents of that book. You could do that. It would cost about the same as producing one, nicely illuminated manuscript that one of the better scriptoria in all of Central Europe or Italy might produce and illuminate. Right.
So, well, here we are, and a book like the one I just published, I've noticed a difference. The previous book I published was in 2018.
Yes, and this was your biography of the autobiography of Saint Teresa?
Saint Teresa, yeah. I didn't get that many invitations to podcasts as I'm getting now for this book. There's been an exponential increase, I think, in the number of sites such as yours, which open up audiences in a way that was not possible before. Or just people were not used to the medium, and now we are more used to it, and people are figuring out ways of tapping this potential, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah, I imagine that, right, everybody's sort of being forced to use some form of this medium as a result of the pandemic and lockdowns and stuff.
That helped.
Sort of may have. Well, it's something like I forget where I heard this statistic. I want to say I heard this from Alex Hormozy, who I think is an entrepreneur and podcaster. But it's something like, in order to be in the top 1%, the 99th percentile of productive podcasts, you only need to make 21 episodes.
Really?
Wow. Yes, you only need to make 21 episodes. So, for example, your podcast, the Christian Mysticism Podcast, which we'll get to a bit later, right, is you have already entered into, you are well past the 99th percentile of productive podcasts. I think you're at 35 episodes now, something like that.
Yes, yeah. Well, I'll have to tell my partner. I don't think he loves statistics, and I don't think he's aware of this.
Yes,
I'll tell him, and he'll be very happy.
Right. I mean, I'm relying on this particular data point from this person. But if it holds water, then the percentiles are what they are. So yeah. So I'd like to ask you a bit about your book, about in particular your most recent book, They Flew: A History of the Impossible. So I was particularly intrigued by this. I've been intrigued by some of these topics, actually dating back to our, it would be your Catholic, early modern Catholicism, Catholic Reformation seminar, which I took back in, I want to say 2016, maybe fall of 2016 or spring of 2017. This was shortly after the release of your previous book, your anti-penultimate book, Reformation. Yes, a small piece coming in at, I think, without bibliography, something like 750 pages, something like that.
Yeah, with footnotes and everything, all the apparatus, it's 900 something.
That's right. Yes. So
yes.
Light reading.
Very, very, very light reading.
Yes. Yes, so I started to become interested in some of these questions of well, let's call it as you term it, right? The impossible, supernatural phenomena, sort of inexplicable, difficult to understand, marvelous occurrences at a time in particular, which is looked at as being the beginning of modernity or of enlightened modernity or something like that. And I remember in particular the book that sort of, especially in say the 18th century context that you assigned as reading for the course, was Exorcism and Enlightenment by H.C. Eric Middlefort, about the contest, right? The healing contests, the conflict of exorcism and animal magnetism at the end of the 18th century between Anton Mesmer and Johann Gassner.
Johann Gassner, yes.
Yes. So tell us a bit about They Flew, a history of the impossible. What do you mean by
by the impossible? Actually, it's somewhat amusing and paradoxical. The impossible refers to our day and age, not to that time, because at that time in the 16th and 17th century, most people thought that these strange phenomena, such as levitation, which is being suspended in the air or actually moving through the air, and bilocation, being in two places at once. Ironically, as part of the transition to modernity, both Protestants and Catholics believed that these things actually did happen, that they were possible. And actually, I had this confirmed by one of my colleagues who is a historian of science, Paola Bertucci.
Yes.
One of my talks, she came up and actually she's the one who reminded me, none of these things were impossible in the 16th or 17th century. No scientist would say that this was impossible. It's for us, since the 19th century especially. Now let's go back to the 18th. Beginning in the 18th century is when skepticism about the probability of these phenomena began to gain ground. And not solely because of progress made in science and in scientific discovery. It's a very complex set of circumstances that made levitation and bilocation seem impossible. And it begins actually in this time period with the Protestant Reformation. Because the first, let's call it the first crack through which a wedge can be placed into the reality of these phenomena is the fact that Protestants, beginning as early as the late 15 teens with Martin Luther, began to argue that all of the miracles, including these phenomena claimed by the Catholic Church, were all demonic in origin. They were truly supernatural. Because what they argued was that miracles and phenomena such as these, which had could previously have been attributed to God or the devil, since the year 100 or so, with the death of the last apostle, John the Evangelist, could only be attributed to the devil, because God had ceased working miracles through supernatural means. So, and here's another sort of curious asymmetry that plays a part in creating the impossible, is the fact that whereas Protestants rejected much of Catholic theology, especially how God saves, what the nature and function of the church is, and the place of Scripture in authority, so on and so forth. They rejected many Catholic teachings. Protestants accepted and eagerly adopted medieval Catholic demonology.
Mm-hmm.
So the distinction made in the Middle Ages between a supernatural event, let's put a supernatural event, and a preternatural event.
Mm-hmm.
Supernatural could only be attributed to God because it's really super or above nature.
Mm-hmm.
He can actually be messing or altering the laws of nature because he has the power to do so. He can do anything. The devil, the medieval devil, and therefore also the early modern devil for both Catholics and Protestants, who was very ancient, since angels were created before humans. He had lived for eons. And he was also more intelligent than humans because angels are higher beings.
Mm-hmm.
The devil knew how to manipulate nature. So in other words, and here's what makes me laugh, it's like the devil was a really good scientist.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Who knew how to, what the laws of nature were and how to manipulate them. And also his antiquity, I mean, his age also contributed to this. He had been around for so long that, when it came to things like predicting the future, the devil was a very good statistician.
Yes.
He'd go on odds of something turning out a certain way just because he had seen these things happen so many times.
Yes.
So,
yes, right. He's often depicted as an expert gambler, right? Everyone always, right? He's a trickster, right? Because he lures you into a bet that on the outside seems as though it's fair or perhaps in your interest, when, of course, secretly the odds that you'll escape with what you think you're going to end up with are really, really minimal, right? So he's something of the master technician, combined with, say, the best hedge fund or market maker on Wall Street, right?
yes.
Lures you into the casino, but the house always wins.
But also scam artist.
Yes.
Very good scam artist.
Yes.
And therefore, the transition to modernity is very complex. It's not a straight line. But there is this little bifurcation in the definition of supernatural and what is possible or impossible. So Protestants would say, yes, of course, witches levitate, witches fly to their Sabbaths. And the devil is also very good at tricking people into seeing things that are not there. Creating hallucinations. So, these things happen, and they happen all the time. And I am always reminded of the witchcraft trials at which witnesses could come forward and testify that they had seen so-and-so up in the air. And therefore, so-and-so was a witch. And
yes, I'm very curious, right? This was a question I had from your book that is directly pertinent to this sort of banishment of God from, how to say it, from being a player in natural events, something like that, right? It's almost like, just to sort of recapitulate this a bit, sort of the vision I get, or the picture that I get from your description here, and the picture of sort of a Protestant conception of the impossible, let's call it. Well, not really quite the impossible, the paranormal, the out of the ordinary, these sorts of phenomena like levitation, for example, right, is a removal of them from God. It sort of predates the God the watchmaker, of deism in the 17th, 18th centuries, that was very popular among the Enlightenment philosophers or some of the founding fathers of the United States, like Jefferson or Franklin.
Yes.
So my question here which I'm not quite sure of this, is why did this occur, right? You mentioned that this has its origins going back to Luther's theology. Where does the understanding that suddenly God is not capable of intervening with the miraculous, with the wondrous, as sort of a function or a property of creation? For example, just to say, right, you introduce at the beginning of your book in your introduction, right, you speak about Augustine's definition of nature, for example. And in Augustine's definition of nature, if I recall this correctly, the supernatural is not, in his definition, it's not outside of what is possible within creation, right? His definition of nature is not something like that we as contemporaries sort of refer to nature. Sort of today we say nature and we mean like the universe, like all that is, right? Something like that. But that's not right.
Yeah, we mean the material world, the material universe.
Yes. But Augustine is saying something like, nature is what living things, right? The nature of a living thing is sort of what it is accustomed to do on a regular and predictable basis.
That's right. Yes.
And the supernatural is just what is extraordinary. I think this is how you say this too, right? It's just out of the ordinary. It is a deviation from the sort of what is moral, right? What is mores in the sense of customs or typical behavior, repeated behavior.
Yeah, and nature has capabilities of which we could be ignorant. And that's the second part of Augustine's argument. Because he was having an argument with a Manichaean, Faustus.
Yes, Faustus.
Who said, you're contradicting yourself, and God contradicts himself if he performs these supernatural acts which contradict nature. And Augustine's reply was, no, what God does not contradict nature. It's simply beyond our knowledge of how nature actually works. So it's our limited intellect that is the issue in what God has in medieval theology, and Augustine would say the same. God has infinite. He's omnipotent. He has infinite power. So back to the Protestants, it's not that they were saying that God was incapable of performing miracles, it's that he chose not to. So one has to ask the reason, why did he stop?
Yes.
Because of course the Bible is full of miracles.
Yes.
Old and New Testament are both full of miracles. And of course the Protestant leaders of the Protestant Reformation had to say that, Jesus actually did heal people. And yes, the Red Sea really parted when Moses got there, and so on and so forth. It's just that God gave, of course, Jesus being God, gave his apostles the ability to perform these miracles, so that people would believe their message, that they would believe that Jesus was in fact the Son of God and the Messiah. But then after that, once you had a community of believers by the year 100, and it's an argument I can't really understand, miracles were no longer necessary. And then they would float the following polemical argument. The greatest miracle of Christianity is the fact that the world became Christian without miracles. Wow. But at the very same time, there's another dimension to the Protestant argument, and it has to do with polemics. It's a practical issue. Catholics continually, from the very first, Catholic polemicists argued, look, you have no better proof of the fact that the Catholic Church is the true church than all of its miracles.
Mm-hmm.
And conversely, you have no greater proof that Protestant churches are not real churches because they have no miracles. So the Protestant polemic in response to this was, well, no, all of those miracles you are claiming are not divine in origin. They are satanic in origin. So you can't claim that you have miracles because you don't either. They're being performed by the devil.
So what is the basis for the claim that the Protestant claim, or let's call it the early modern Protestant claim, that the world became Christian without miracles? That's certainly not how medieval Christians relate it, right? I mean, there isn't every single account of every saint from that's sort of, hagiography is almost like a continuation of the miracles of the Bible, right? It's that this has happened, this was happening, and now this continues to happen. It hasn't stopped. It's an unbroken continuum, right? Certainly if you go read, the accounts of, 10th century or 11th century, Polish medieval saints, it's like, why are they converting to Christianity? Why do they choose Catholicism? Why do they abandon paganism? What happens? Well, it's because, these guys go around doing miracles and then they get murdered and then, dismembered and things like this. And then their body parts continue to to work miracles, right? They raise people from the dead. It's not like, once 2,000 years ago, there was this one guy, Jesus, who rose one guy from the dead, and then he rose from the dead. It's like, no, people keep rising from the dead.
Right. Yes, but see, Protestants would say that those are demonic, preternatural wonders.
Yeah.
Or that they are just totally fake, that they're fraudulent. Many people don't know this, even people who are, experts on the Protestant Reformation. John Calvin's best-selling book, and John Calvin was the reformer of Geneva and essential for the development of Reformed Protestantism. His best-selling book was his inventory of relics, and it's a thin book, but it's hefty in this respect, that he analyzes various relics that are very well known, that were being venerated in his day and age. And with good historical skill, he unmasks the deception behind all of them, how they could not be the items that they claim to be. Such as, for instance, Mary's milk, the milk from the Virgin Mary.
Yes.
Or the 37 heads of John the Baptist. He did not have 37 heads, and so on and so forth. And this book was immensely popular. It was an unmasking of frauds.
Yes.
These things are not real. These miracles are all fake. And the devil is involved in all this. But, if we take a step back centuries to the beginning of Christianity, what the early church fathers argued about pagan religion and pagan magic, which also had its miracles or wonders, was that it was all demonic. So Protestants take that ancient Christian argument about paganism and they apply it to Catholicism. Oh, it's all demonic. And what I found very, very revealing in my research, the most revealing account I came across that showed how the Protestant demonic impossible was identical to the Catholic divine impossible. Two accounts. One is an account from Saint Teresa of Avila. Actually, there are several such accounts where she orders her nuns, because she's their superior, next time you see me going up in the air, try to hold me down. Right? Try to hold me down. And if I do go up, please try to pull me back down to the floor. And they fail miserably. In several of these episodes, they just can't. It's the pull on Teresa, or the push if she's coming from below. It's too much. So there's one account in particular of Teresa going into ecstasy while she was cooking with a frying pan in her hand. And it held the last little bit of oil that the convent had. So the nuns are trying to pull her down with the frying pan in her hand, but they're worried that the oil is going to spill and they're not going to have any more olive oil for a few more weeks. So it's kind of a very comical scene, right? Finally, Teresa comes back down by herself. This would be in the 1550s, 1560s. Flash forward to 1693 in Puritan Boston. This is right after the Salem witch trials. A teenage girl in Boston, a Puritan Protestant teenage girl, is possessed by the devil. And the leading Puritan divine of Boston, Cotton Mather, gets involved in trying to expel this demon from this girl. So he brings several men with him to the house where this girl lives. And he orders them, if she's in bed, she's lying in bed. If she starts to go up, let's pile up on her, keep her from going up. And it's precisely what is described as happening. All these burly men jump on this teenage girl, but she goes up to the rafters anyway. And then they try to pull her down, but they can't. Phenomenologically, the two events are identical.
Yes.
With one difference. With Teresa, it's God doing the lifting. With Cotton Mather and his burly men, all of whom he forced to sign affidavits afterwards that they had witnessed this, and that this had in fact happened to them. For them, it was demonic. So I always startle my students when I say, 1693 was not that long ago.
Yes.
The grand scheme of things, 1693 was yesterday. So that's fairly recent. But again, it's very difficult to get behind, to fully understand the logic of the cessation of miracles doctrine of early Protestantism. And there are still Protestant churches that still stick to this belief in the cessation of miracles. Although miracles do work their way back to Protestantism. And if anyone is interested in seeing how that happens, there's a wonderful book by Jane Shaw, S-H-A-W, Miracles in Enlightenment England. And it's all about 18th century comeback of miracles in Protestant England.
If I'm not mistaken, this phenomenon also has sort of it has legs in the colonies as well with the Great Awakening. Although it's remembered very often, we remember people like Jonathan Edwards, sinners in the hands of an angry God, and fire and brimstone preaching. There's also a significant amount of, I think you even make this comparison at the beginning of the book as well, where the language of 18th century Great Awakening sort of hymnody and revelation and stuff sort of has this mystical component to it that is remarkably like, say, 16th or 17th century
Yes.
Catholic mysticism and sort of miracle working.
And once you have a return of what ends up being called Pentecostalism in Protestantism, right? The claim that the Holy Spirit is very lively at work in the church. And then you begin to have faith healers. And faith healers were pretty common on American television, the 1950s and 1960s, the early days of television. Because the visual spectacle, I mean, and on radio, it wouldn't have the same effect. Although there were faith healers, before television was in every home. These television evangelists who healed people in front of the camera, sometimes live, is proof of the fact that you can't make broad generalizations about the miraculous and its place in Protestantism. But in the early days, when Protestant churches began to be established, there was no room for miracle, and much less for miracles of the sort that I analyzed, which are physical side effects of mystical ecstasy. Because another thing that Protestants denied, these early Protestants, was mystical ecstasy of the sort that was being claimed by Catholics and had been claimed since the early church about people going raptures and
as I understood it, just to make sure I understand this correctly, the Protestant polemic against mystical raptures in the Catholic case was similar to their attitude toward miracles, and that they are devil or demon born. They're not actually mystical raptures by God, not revelations of the divine, but they are possessions by demons. That everything or hallucinations. Interesting. Hallucinations generated from what?
Well, the devil.
What is the genesis? Is it a devil-born hallucination, or is it?
It could be. It could be
a malfunctioning brain in that, is sort of right. We've sort of. It's very interesting, and this is sort of leading me towards this other question that maybe I can frame here for us. I'm very interested in sort of the similarities between sort of the epical similarities between this sort of this grouping of natural phenomena, right? Because the way that I'm looking at this, right? You can call these phenomena perhaps by what word you would like, right? In a certain sense, right? You could say, okay, this is a possession, this is a rapture, this is a healing, this is something like that. Okay, you can sort of bias the language modally. You could say, okay, it's a possession, it's pathological, right? It's demonic, therefore it's pathological. We don't want that. That's pain. That's taking us away from things as they should. Okay. Or you could say, right, it's an ecstatic rapture and a revelation from heaven. Okay, you can bias it toward the good, right? Or you could say something like, it's a schizotypal delusion, right? You can apply various kinds of, rhetorical structures to the same manifest, race, the thing, right? The difference between, words and things, as this, what would you call it? Collocation is expressed in early modern terms. So I'm interested, for example, there's another book, and it was actually my reading in part of Mittelford's book on exorcism and enlightenment in your class that led me to this other book. Are you familiar with Henri Ellenberger's Discovery of the Unconscious, A Dynamic History of Psychiatry?
No. Sounds wonderful.
So this is talk about monumental tomes. This is also a monumental tome. I think it rivals in length Reformations by Carlos Eire. It's quite long. It's also squatter. It's a squatter volume. Yours is a little bit bigger, so it's not quite so chunky. It's quite the chunky
public
book.
Clarification: I asked the publisher to make it 2 volumes.
Yes,
but they refused.
Yeah, that would have been a little bit easier to read in bed.
Psychoanalysis, is it? The origins of psychoanalysis?
So he calls it, and now he's particular about this, being a historian of psychiatry, right? He says dynamic psychiatry. So his objective in this book is to specifically explore the sort of healing elements of supernatural phenomena. This is from 1970. I think he completed the book in 1969. And although the big 3 early psychoanalytic schools are there, so Freud is obviously there, Jung is there, and Alfred Adler are there. They have chapters. There's also Genet, who predates them, had some influence on Jung, is also a rough contemporary of them. He doesn't get to some of the later ones like Viktor Frankl, or Ludwig Binswanger. He does mention them, I believe. But really, the first half of his book, right, he gets to these sort of the 20th century dynamic, psychoanalytic schools. But the first half of the book is, it goes through sort of shamanic healings. So how in, say, how some of these, how possessions or how spiritual curses or taboos or these sorts of things were treated with by sort of shamanic healers who found ways, they cast various spells, or they had various charms, they had various prescriptions. He also talks quite a lot about exorcism, and the Gassner-Mesmer incident gets its own chapter in his book. And there is also a chapter on the school of animal magnetism that came after Mesmer's school, right? And really what I found very interesting is, he talks about sort of the importance of sort of, it's like there's a component of specific individuals, right? It takes a specific individual to be able to affect supernatural healing. Not anybody can do it. 2, supernatural healers perhaps can't heal everyone, but certain people are predisposed to being healed by certain people, right? So, for example, I think one of the comparisons he makes is something like Freud had, like, the majority of his clientele was sort of upper class, sort of nobility or sort of bourgeois Viennese individuals, right? And he said something like, 75% of his patients who reported successful results with his cure came from this particular social group. Whereas Adler, although Adler was also working in Vienna at the same time as Freud, Adler had a lot more success with individuals from the working class, or from lower class individuals.
How about that?
It was very interesting. Adler had a lot more success. Well, I don't need to go into crazy detail there, but what was interesting to me about this book was the sort of connection between sort of, he doesn't get into all of the supernatural phenomena like you do, right? You're looking not just at healings or possessions. But he looks at sort of how these sorts of phenomena do not only occur in these localized time periods. It's not like, right, just as you point out in the 19th and 20th centuries, it's not like all of a sudden they stop happening. Right? You have a 20th century example with Padre Pio levitating. They don't stop happening, but where they occur shifts. So possession looks a lot like what the animal magnetists are able to sort of heal by, what they call an imbalance of magnetic fluid it looks a lot like, right? It's slightly different. They're not all the same. They're sort of the way the symptoms manifest themselves differ, but there are similarities. Sort of the neurologists of the late 19th century who precede the psychoanalysts, they experience something similar. They're able to affect certain cures, and sort of they find people undergoing these similar types of disorders or symptoms, right? But he notices, right, that there is this shift, and there's a shift of I'm having this type of experience, and again he's focusing on pathological experiences. I have to go see a priest or a Protestant minister. He also, exorcism in some fashion, because right, Protestants and Catholics are performing exorcisms, although Catholics tend to be more effective with them, into the 19th century. But Mesmer also has these successes with animal magnetism, as does his successor Priesiger. And then the psychoanalysts, Jung, Freud, Adler, also have success, although with different people and in sort of different configurations and with different symptomatologies. But sort of, do you have any insight on what's going on here with this as a natural phenomenon?
Yeah, that, in fact, throughout the Middle Ages, those who carried out exorcisms were very much aware of mental illness. And there was always an attempt to discern whether the individual who was acting strangely was mentally ill or not. And they had different ways of figuring this out, which get more and more specific as time passes. By the time you get to the 17th century, the Catholic rite of exorcism, there are very clear instructions on how to determine whether somebody is mentally ill or under demonic influence. And here's where, the theology gets very specific. Catholic theology or demonology. Someone can start acting strangely because they are possessed, which means that a demon, or plural demons, take over their personality. But there's also obsession. Obsession, not as we mean it, as a psychiatric disorder of obsessive compulsive behavior. No, obsession is that demons externally are tempting and tormenting and terrifying an individual. So all these fine distinctions have to be made. The exorcism, if in fact it is determined that this person is possessed by a demon, the Rituale Romanum, 17th century, has very, very, very specific, not suggestions, but rites that can be performed, which Protestants don't have. They pray, they read the Bible, the person who is affected. But this idea that mystical ecstasy is some kind of pathology begins to emerge, of course, in the 19th century. But it may be because I have not looked for it, but I have found very little literature, just in passing, in dealing with mysticism, that details the history of when mysticism became a pathology in secular culture. Right? Because it does become a pathology. But the instructions for nuns, monks, mostly, who spent their whole life in prayer, was that if they start to see things, hear things, classic signs now of schizophrenia, right? Hallucinations, audible suggestions, and so on and so forth. There are ways of testing it out, because as it says in the New Testament, and I believe it's the Apostle Paul who says the devil can disguise himself as an agent of light. So be careful. Yeah, the devil can cause hallucinations. But here's how specific this theology and demonology gets. There are differences between a physical vision of seeing something with your physical eyes and an intellectual vision.
Yes.
And in Catholic teaching, the devil is much better at fooling people with physical vision.
Yes.
Than their mind.
Yes.
So when Teresa of Avila, again, back to her as an example, she is seeing Jesus. Jesus appears to her repeatedly. And her confessors, all of them, one after the other, they say, that's not Jesus, that's the devil. And again, another narrative that's always made me laugh is one confessor orders Teresa under her vow of obedience. Next time Jesus shows up, make an obscene gesture. Give him the fig.
The fig, yes.
Which is the equivalent of our, middle finger, but it's actually the thumb.
Yeah. No, it's also in my as I understand the origins of the fig, it's also quite a bit more explicit than the bird, as it were. Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, she does that. Jesus shows up and she gives him the fig. And I paraphrase. He says, "Thank you." He thanks her. "Thank you for obeying your superior. But now go and tell him I'm not the devil." Finally, she gets a confessor who is younger than her, a young Jesuit, who is the first to tell her, yes, that is Jesus. Go with it. So as you can see, experts, we'll put quotation marks around experts, back then had differences of opinion on what these visions were.
Yes.
This is what Protestants would say. All of those monks and nuns who are having visions are really seeing the devil, who disguises himself as an angel of light. And if they go into a cataleptic ecstasy, which in modern psychiatry or medicine is called a cataleptic seizure, that is, you lose mobility, you stiffen up.
Yes.
Stiffen up, and people try to move your limbs and they can't because you're so rigid. You lose sensation. You can be pricked with pins and needles and won't react, and so on and so forth. Those cataleptic seizures, I'll put quotation marks around seizures, those are demonically induced. Whereas on the Catholic side, they would say, well, that's ecstasy. And sometimes a side effect of ecstasy is that you go up in the air, or while in cataleptic ecstasy, and sometimes while levitating, the individual can appear at a completely different location, actually interact with people at the other location.
Yes.
So that's the enormity of the Catholic possible and the Protestant or scientific impossible.
Yeah, it's well, these questions are particularly interesting to me, particularly engaging for me, and I'm consider myself very fortunate to have been able to have been exposed to some of these questions with you for such a long time. Because this, I growing up, I was raised Protestant, right? I was raised Methodist. I still have a lot of affection for the Methodist, for the Methodist Church, both their musical tradition.
The music is much better.
Well, the congregations tend to be a lot more musical. I'll say that.
Well, Charles Wesley,
especially in the U.S.
Yeah, well, you're a musician, so you're the expert on this, definitely.
Charles Wesley is an excellent hymnodist.
Hymnodist, yeah.
Hymnodist. It is hymnodist. Yes. Yeah. Yes, but sort of this question. Right. It wasn't like I was sort of dogmatically taught like you must believe this, right? There are certain sort of American Protestant traditions that are kind of universal, like, oh yeah, miracles. Maybe, I don't know, but we don't really have a system of thinking about them. Just if they happen, and you believe them, then well, that's between you and God. Then great. But right, there isn't a tradition of taking this seriously in a methodical way, in a systematic way, or in a way that says, no, if we really want to investigate this, if we really want to understand this, we should be very careful and devote maybe even hundreds of years to trying to figure out what's going on here, because something is going on. This is occurring too many times for it to be noise. So maybe we should pay attention to this. There's clearly something in this that we don't understand that we should say, okay, all right, it's possible, right? So if it's possible, then we should consider both the possibility of benefit and of ill for that lies in attempting to understand it. No. And I think I was particularly drawn to Catholicism, at least in Connecticut, because this was a part of it. It was like, okay, there's all these reports of these things that are inexplicable, but it doesn't mean that we can't come to a fuller understanding, if not a complete one, by taking them seriously.
Well, by definition, St. Augustine's definition, which is also St. Thomas Aquinas's definition, these anomalous phenomena, which we call miracles, are always surprising because something is happening that normally does not happen.
Yes.
But the explanation is we simply don't know enough about reality. We simply don't know enough to be able to discern how it is that it happens. And I'm always also reminded of the classical definition of grace provided by Thomas Aquinas himself. And grace is always in medieval theology defined as supernatural. Grace is a supernatural power that comes direct from God. And Thomas Aquinas' definition of grace is that grace does not counteract nature or destroy nature. It perfects it.
I like that.
It brings something that is normally missing. So grace is the divine power that in Catholic theology that helps individuals straighten out their will, straighten out their choices, their choosing, to do away with negative behaviors and stimulate positive behaviors. It's very pragmatic grace. You have to respond to it. That's the Catholic theology. You have to respond to grace. But grace just simply overcomes through supernatural means. It helps your nature, your will, which is corrupt from original sin. It helps us straighten it out, perfects it. It brings it actually. The theology is beautiful in this sense that what are you working towards? Well, you're working towards restoring the original human condition that Adam and Eve had in the garden before they screwed up and passed it on. So grace perfects nature. if you extend that to these weird phenomena, levitation, bilocation, telepathy, all these other things that we haven't even mentioned. Well, then you can float an argument, which might be more convincing to some people than others. You can float the argument that all of these strange phenomena are actually natural.
Yes. In
the sense that they are abilities that humans have that often go untapped. Yes.
Well, this is exactly what had me so curious about, say, this particular psychiatric, like, history of psychiatry tradition, right? It was why Ellenberger was interesting to me. It's why someone like Middelfurt was interesting to me, right? Because these are individuals who took these and said, no, well, these are a part of nature, right? It's like they were building off of Aquinas's understanding of grace as a supernatural phenomenon. It does not. It's not something that exists outside of nature that then, God sticks in, violating all of the laws, and then, no. It is a consummation of various instances of the ordinary, right? But it's something perhaps that needs to be, well, actually, yes, right? It's something that needs to be cultivated. This is something, for example, Mircea Eliade, The History of Religion, Romanian History of Religion, talks a lot about this in his book on shamanism. And the degree to which, this is Lord only knows how old the shamanic tradition is, period, right? Like, to Adam and Eve, right? The first parents. As old as there are human beings, if we're thinking about this from a natural historical perspective as well, right? There have always been rites of initiation. There is a process of intense subjection to rigorous trials. First, there is a special individual who is selected, and then that individual is put through a series of trials and is driven to a point where they're either driven insane, or, right, if they fail the ordeals, or they succeed and they emerge with these special powers, right? They have this communicative ability with the divine, right? Yeah. In that way, it mirrors in part, right, the rites of Catholic initiation, although the degree to which those are still as rigorous to, say, a shamanic ritual is unknown, right? But priests are put through this sort of training, right? I mean, the priests were regularly trained on how to be exorcists. This was a part of it, right?
Well, there's a great continuity in religion. From tribal religion to the very hierarchically organized religions of great civilizations. You always have an intermediary of some sort, a human being who channels that power from the other dimension in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's a shaman, or a Catholic or Orthodox priest, or Calvinist Puritan in 1693 Boston. Cotton Mather was there as a representative of the divine, channeling some kind of power and authority. It's very interesting the way that these things work themselves out. For me, it's the fact, which is a fact, and it's an undeniable fact, that there are people who do not belong to any organized religion who claim to have had these experiences. I've been getting emails from individuals who have read my book, or or seen me online or something. And
Mm-hmm.
they give me their testimonial. I have levitated.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen other people levitating.
Mm-hmm.
Or I have bilocated, or I have experienced bilocation of someone else.
Yes.
And, these people are earnest. They're serious. Of course, there are those who would say, well, these people are pulling your leg or they're delusional. But it's still a fact that there are people who claim to have witnessed this or to have had it happen to them. And they are the kind of person who would describe themselves as not religious.
Yes.
So that line gets very fuzzy between natural, supernatural, religious. What else do you call it? Well, in our society, we tend to call them psychic.
Yeah. Well, hey, attuned to the soul, right?
Yes.
Psyche.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Society for Psychical Research, established in the 19th century. Scientific as scientific can get. That was their aim.
Yeah.
So this is the thing. I got an email from someone saying that he practiced remote viewing for the CIA. The remote viewing program was being carried out at the height of the Cold War by both the CIA in the United States and the KGB in the Soviet Union and satellite states. What is remote viewing? Remote viewing is a quote-unquote psychic or a person with psychic powers in one room here in the United States could somehow access places in the Soviet Union and see things as they were over there and then report back what they had seen. So it's a form of spying.
Yes.
And this went on for 2 decades.
Yes.
In both countries.
What were the results of this? Did they did they find out this was successful, or
they got some hits? That's the thing. That's why it went for 2 decades. They got hits.
Yeah.
That they were later confirmed. What was described was later confirmed to be actually as it was described or very close to it.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, this man who wrote to me said, sometimes when I was doing remote viewing, I bilocated. And I could communicate with people at the other side. And it didn't matter that we didn't speak the same language. We understood each other. And it happened to me many times. And it happened to others too. I can put you in touch with them.
Yeah.
It's
Well, I've definitely I can say this, right? not to get too spooky, but I wouldn't say I've done that through conscious practice, but I have experienced things like this in dreams, for example.
Oh yes.
Right, like levitation in dreams, like another Thursday. That happens to me a lot in dreams.
Yeah.
And it differs from, sometimes it's flying, and sometimes I can just like jump really, really high. Right. Like you said, speaking to people in languages that I don't know, but understanding them, like communication, with I don't know, spirits of animals, something like that. Right. I mean, I recognize it for me, it only happens in my dreams, but it's not beyond the pale. These sorts of things are not beyond the pale of human experience. I don't consider myself to be an exceptionally mystical person, but I can comprehend these experiences.
I think everyone has had I shouldn't say everyone, many people have experiences they can't pin down or explain because they're anomalous experiences. I once witnessed someone who got possessed by a spirit. I was at somebody's house for dinner, and the lady of the house suddenly started shaking and breathing funny. They suddenly started speaking with a very thick German accent. And I was terrified because I didn't know what was happening. But that's what 19th and 20th century mediums did. They claimed that they were taken over by some dead person who would then prophesy the future and so on and so forth. I witnessed it. It could all have been very easily faked. But there are people who they testify, they've written to me saying that they have seen levitations, bilocations, or experienced them. And they're not religious. In 19th century, 20th century mediums were not necessarily religious either. They spiritualism was its own kind of religion. But that's where things are, and of course, everyone is entitled to say, anyone. Okay, that's going to get it's a very complicated sentence. Let me simplify it.
Okay.
People can say these testimonies are all lies, and these so-called eyewitnesses or first-person accounts, they're all lying. They're all just making it up. Yeah, it's a rational, logical conclusion. But what I'd like to focus on is it's just the sheer number of such quote-unquote liars.
Yes.
The volume of the lying. And especially in history, when you get past a certain point, like when you get to the 17th century, the lying, massive lying, becomes more difficult because there are ways that people have already developed to discern what's true from what's false.
Yes.
And in the case of Catholic miracles, such as the ones that I studied, much of the evidence comes from the inquests carried out during the canonization process. And the church has very, very strict process for determining whether somebody was a holy person or not. And these inquests are carried out with questionnaires. Everybody gets the same questionnaire about this person. And then, of course, there's a whole section on miracles. Have you witnessed any? Same as in a court of law. These people who are answering the questionnaire have to swear that they're telling the truth. But unlike a court of law, where if you commit perjury, the only thing that can happen to you is that you go to prison or get fined. In this case, you go to hell. And most of these are very, very deeply religious people, very committed to, Are you telling me that thousands of people have all lied, knowing that their lie can land them in hell?
Yeah.
As a historian, I find that very difficult to make the argument that, yes, they are all lying.
Yes. Especially since they're such convicted religious people, right? That, in this, these are people who have given their entire lives, who have given up everything else in their lives, given up property, status, stature, family, things like this, to live lives of extreme asceticism, poverty, isolation, discomfort, really extreme discomfort in many cases, as you've revealed in your book, right? Subjecting themselves to degrees of self-flagellation, mutilation, deprivation of all sorts, really bringing themselves to levels of extreme mortification, which are not commonly witnessed or endured in our present age.
Right.
For people to.
In our present age, I can see, people who are not aware of the tradition or don't care to become aware of the tradition can say, well, hell is never real. Nobody really thinks that hell exists, because of course hell doesn't exist. So this is not a motivation. This is not going to stop anyone from lying, because everybody knows hell is not real. But I find that to be a very sort of what's a puerile kind of argument.
Yes.
Yeah, of course, everyone. It's something a child would say. The typical back and forth between childish insults. You're an idiot. No, you're an idiot. No, you're an idiot. Back and forth.
Oh, yeah. Oh. I guess. See, I guess I'm wrong because I'm me, but you're right because you're you.
Yeah.
Duh.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, everyone's a liar. So there are two reviews of my book have appeared. One accuses me of dishonesty.
Yes.
For pretending, because of course I can't really be serious about this, for pretending that these people are not lying. So I'm dishonest and devious.
How could you, Carlos?
And the other review called my book deeply unserious.
Deeply unserious.
Yes.
Yes.
Because I accept all these liars. No,
of course.
It's the fact that the authors of the reviews cannot get it through their minds or their heads that I actually don't think these people are lying. They think I actually know that they're lying, but yet I pretend that I don't know such a thing.
Yes.
Just the opposite.
Yes. I think we can come up with a new hashtag. We can do hashtag believe all mystics. Can I say that?
Sure.
All right, great. Are they going to kick me off the internet?
I joked before the book came out with several people saying, I'm going to have my teaching license revoked.
Yeah, that's it.
But
Licencia ubique docendi out the window. They're taking the octagonal hat too. No more hat.
Right. Yes. Defenestration of esteemed Professor so-and-so. He crossed the line, or she crossed the line. But ironically, I didn't have my teaching. I have not had my teaching license revoked. And on the contrary, this past spring, I won a teaching prize.
That's right. You did. Yeah. I saw that in the spring, right?
Yes. And I actually, expected it to be a paltry sum, given the institution that was giving it has a
of course.
tradition of not being too generous with such things. But no, it was very nice, pretty hefty. So we'll see. The investigation continues.
Yes.
Because there have not been any academic journals that have published reviews yet. All these reviews have appeared in basically, public square publications, newspapers, magazines, and so on forth. So we'll see.
Well, fingers crossed. I guess, right? I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder, do academic reviews really matter to that degree anymore now, right? That we've moved into this age of internet and
They do for those that are still untenured.
I see. Yes.
Then oh boy, they can be brought forward as proof that someone doesn't deserve tenure.
Of course.
I've seen it happen way too many times. I feel like what's his face?
Really?
Kurtz in
the
Joseph
Heart
Conrad.
of Darkness.
Heart of Darkness. Yes, the horror. Horror.
Really, I'm surprised to hear that happens that often. But I guess I shouldn't be.
Oh no. It's just anyway. That's off topic, but really, it's not really off topic because the question of evidence is what gets used as evidence.
Yes. Yes. Right. Yes. Yeah. So right. Maybe just to sort of, I guess, sort of bring this back around here. Right. Maybe the question of, right, as you said at the beginning of our conversation, right, the question of the impossible, or the question of the supernatural, is a question, something like a question of perception. A question of being able to see what occurs very rarely, or what is difficult to see. Being unable to see it because of perhaps a modern standpoint of refusing to see it, or because of labeling it as something else, or of this tendency to pathologize what is extraordinary, right? Something happens very rarely, or something is not typical, therefore it goes in the pathology box. This is a problem, right?
And then there's social pressure.
Yes.
Of people who actually might have had some kind of weird experience, but they're afraid to talk about it because people will think ill of them.
Yes.
That applies to people who see ghosts, people who claim have seen UFOs and any other kind of weird phenomenon. They won't report to anyone, not even their own family members, because it's a social fact that these things don't happen.
Yes. Yes, this is, you mentioned at the end of the book, right? Durkheim's social facts, right?
Yes.
Yes. Just as it was a social fact in the early modern period that such things were possible, and that they occurred under certain conditions in our time, in our age, it has become a social fact that such things cannot happen. Or if they do, there is clearly some sort of there is some perhaps materialistic or mechanistic explanation. Something has malfunctioned in the computer that is the nervous system, something like that.
Yes. And it always, it's possible, absolutely possible, not only possible, but it's the only way that's accepted in academia of approaching these phenomena is to analyze their function, their social and political and cultural function. That's
of course, right? Everything is socially constructed, by which the modern academic, right, in modern academic jargon, everything that is socially constructed has been manipulated to the end of power.
Right.
I believe is the translation, if you were to translate that out. For example, to say that gender is a social construct, or religion is a social construct, or what have you, right? Any of these things to which that phrase X equals social construct. What really is being said is gender is like a rhetorical, sophistic manipulation that is done so that some may exploit others to their own personal material or property gain, right? And sort of this is wheeled out as anything that doesn't belong in academic discourse. Immediately you get the, oh well, this is a construct. This is a social construct, right? So that heuristic can be applied to it.
Yeah, and levitating and bilocating is ultimately all about power.
Yes.
In some way, one way or another. Yeah.
Has to be. So yes, for those of you watching and listening, if you are interested in learning more about a history of the impossible, I highly recommend Carlos's book, They Flew, available now as an ebook, available now on Amazon at your local bookstore, and also as an audiobook on Audible. I did check this; it is on Audible.
Yes, it is.
With very, very excellently. So I highly recommend this. I'd highly recommend also following Dr. Eire and his speaking engagements. There are a number of them on YouTube as well. Some longer form lectures. I think one of them you have an hour and a half lecture on the book as well. So I'd highly encourage you all to check that out. Additionally, Carlos, you co-host your own podcast with Alberto de la Cruz, Christian Mysticism Podcast, which we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, of which you are already in the 99th percentile of creators. Where maybe you can share a few words about Christian Mysticism Podcast, those of us listening can.
It's basically like what you and I have been doing here. It's a conversation between me and Alberto, who's a good friend and is not an academic. So he's the one who suggested that we do this podcast because he's very interested in the subject. And we've talked about it various times. And he said, hey, let's do a podcast, and he asks the kinds of questions that most people who are interested in mysticism have, who are not scholars of mysticism. So, it's not addressed to experts. It's addressed to everyone who has an interest in the subject. We stay within Christian mysticism. At least for now, we have since the podcast began. All our shows have been on Christian mystics, but we cover all 20 centuries, basically. Our latest podcast, which appeared last Thursday, was on Padre Pio.
Yes.
And our next one is going to be on the intersection or connections that exist between mysticism and exorcism.
Okay, all right. Perfect.
But we have listeners in every continent except Antarctica. We're trying to fix that. Get somebody at the Cape McMurdo station to listen in. We'll see.
Yeah, one of them.
Or a penguin.
One of them, right? Yeah, hey, penguins, I've seen some of them. Wasn't there that movie Happy Feet? That was a documentary, right? They like to dance and stuff. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But we need a listener in Antarctica just to cover the globe, which surprises me because it's in English, of course.
Yes.
But English is a very international language.
Yeah, that's our lingua franca of the 21st century.
I think we have listeners in Poland, by the way.
You've got this one.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. No, before you came on, before you started listening, I think we had some.
I could believe that. I would believe that. Poles are very surprisingly good with English. So yes. So thank you very much. Thank you so much for your time today. This was a wonderful discussion. Thank you for entertaining my questions.
Thank you,
on the book. It was great to catch up as well. Thank you to everyone watching and listening. Please go ahead and give the Christian Mysticism Podcast a follow. Take a look at some of Carlos's content if you're interested in this type of material, and do go ahead and give They Flew, A History of the Impossible, a read. So Carlos, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Until next time.
Thank you.